Hello everyone, Adrienne here. So today, I cannot tell you how excited I am for today's video. So today's video is going to be an interview with Ted Breaux, the master distiller and the mastermind behind Jade Liqueurs and Lucid Absinthe Superieure. So I am just, I cannot tell you how much excitement went behind asking Ted to come onto my channel so that I could interview him and have him answer some of your questions. I know a lot of you asked a lot of questions and I'm really sorry that we couldn't get to all of them, but I think he did provide a great deal of information that I think everyone will find useful. And we did talk a little bit about maybe doing like a live stream, maybe somewhere on down the road. That being said, I really enjoyed my talk with Ted. I still cannot believe I actually sat down and interviewed Ted Breaux for my channel. I'm so happy and I'm so thankful because without your guys' support, I don't think this could have happened. So thank you all so much for your support because you made this possible. So Ted was actually super sweet and had a glass of Jade Terminus Oxygenee during our chat today, and that really meant a lot to me because it showed me that he cared about my opinion. I have told him on numerous occasions that Jade Terminus Oxygenee is my favorite absinthe of all time, and he actually got like one of his aged bottles from his little stock that he has in his home. So yeah, it was really nice to sit down and drink the same absinthe with him. Obviously not the same one, but not the exact same one, but pretty damn close. So I hope you guys enjoyed this chat as much as I did. I really had a lot of fun. I think Ted had some fun too. And he really just provided a wealth of information, and I'm really glad that I was able to do this. So without further ado, here is my interview with Ted Breaux. So guys, I am joined here by Ted Breaux, absinthe pioneer, legend, and I guess the man, the myth, and the legend here. I just feel so privileged and honored to be doing an interview with him. I guess you guys are all part of the reason why this was happening here. So, Ted, go ahead and introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background, and we can get into these questions.
Well, let's see. A little bit of my background. Well, first, I'm a research scientist. So that would be my proper background. And I took on absinthe as a research project many years ago. Back in, actually, it was around the end of 1993. A long time ago. Yeah. And back then, it wasn't like you could just pop onto the web and there was no Wikipedia. It wasn't like that. If you wanted to research something, you had to do it the old-fashioned way. I was absolutely astounded by the absinthe mystery because in my job as a research scientist, one of the things that I did quite often was analyze samples of like water, like from rivers, lakes, groundwater, whatever, and look for things that weren't supposed to be there. Man-made compounds, contamination. So the whole mystery of absinthe was really strange. Really interesting how a mystery could persist for so long. And being from New Orleans, I had seen the word. I had walked down Bourbon Street and seen the old Absinthe House, which had been there since 1874. So the word I had seen, but never really inquired as to what it was. And it was one of those situations where for every answer that I could get, there were two more questions, at least, that popped up. And I happened across the book Absinthe History in a Bottle by Barnaby Conrad, published in 1988. He did an amazing job with that book. And that really just deepened the mystery and deepened my determination to get to the bottom of the mystery. But that's how I got involved with all this. It was not part of my life plan. Just so I happened across it and I latched on to it, and I wasn't letting go until I got to the bottom of the rabbit hole, which went very, very deep.
Yeah, it's really interesting how whenever anyone gets into absinthe and falls deeply in love with it, it's, once they figure out that it's not hallucinogenic and not dangerous, like the people who truly love it don't really want to let go of it and are very deeply determined on keeping true to its legacy. And so I feel like that definitely happened with you, and it definitely happened with me when I discovered absinthe at the very wee young age of 11 years old. So,
Well,
yeah.
when I got interested in absinthe, I assumed that most of the myths and the rumors, I just assumed that there was some truth to them. I mean, it seemed like there was these anecdotal beliefs, and I wanted to understand the basis of those beliefs. I assumed the same things that many people, did when they got into absinthe. I assumed these things to be true. I assumed there was something in it that was hallucinogenic, or, there was something wrong with it, and I wanted to know what it was. And it was interesting because the people that wrote articles about absinthe, when I would contact them and ask them questions, they couldn't really answer my questions. They'd never had absinthe.
Of
So,
course.
yeah. So, I mean, it's, you can't study something if you don't have it. And in 1996, I came across, from two completely different directions, two full bottles of vintage absinthe that fell into my lap. Really, really weird how all this went down. But that was what I call the Rosetta Stone. That was the missing link that I needed to really study this. And then in 2000, I became the first person to take samples of vintage absinthe and analyze them using modern science, which I couldn't believe at that point had never been done. But then
Isn't that
again,
insane?
well, but who's got vintage absinthe floating around?
No one.
Right. And, to perform a study like that, you have to have access to the right equipment. It takes time. It takes money. It's not something that someone wouldn't do unless they were very determined. And I was that person. I was the outlier. I was the oddball. And I was also, as I say, in a very lonely club that consisted of a handful of members that had tasted vintage absinthe, knew what it tasted like, and didn't realize that there was nothing on the market like it.
Wow.
Anything in the market sold as absinthe at that time was basically flavored vodka with green dye.
Gross.
And a lot of fake, false promises, just absolute rubbish.
Yeah, just like, hey guys, we'll set this on fire and promise hallucinations. And, oh yeah, we lured in these American tourists and got their money.
Yeah, well, that was a problem back then. And the more I knew and the more became enlightened about absinthe, the more disgusted I was with what was out there and the way that it was portrayed. And it was just full of ignorance, to be polite. And just, and it really, it was if there's any credit that I give to all the fake scents that were out there, it's that they inspired me to do what I did, which is 180 degrees from what they did.
Absolutely. What you set out to do is definitely so different from what everyone thinks of when they think of absinthe. They see the toxic sludge green, glowing, the shots, and oh god, and every time I come up against that misconception and that perception of absinthe, and I try to address it, people are just like, oh, you haven't had the real stuff and you're just salty about it. And I'm just like, no, that's not it at all.
Well, I've had the real stuff, so to speak. I've had I mean, I've tasted dozens of different pre-bans. I've been totally looped on pre-ban. I mean, it's a beautiful drink. That's it. And that's what it
really
was.
is.
Yeah. So here's to that.
Santé, everyone. A little
Why not?
spilled out of my finger.
So it was a challenge to get all this misinformation turned around.
Yeah, and even now it's still a challenge because people are still like really determined to believe the misconception because somehow that makes them cool. Not sure exactly how that works, but okay. As one of my friends said, wow, since when was misinformation fun? I guess we missed the memo.
Well, it's just a fault of human nature. We like to believe the things that sound good to us, despite the fact that they may be sweet lies. But the reality is there is a truth, and it may not be what you want to believe. But the thing about absinthe is it's not just a spirit. There's so much. I mean, it in the world of spirits, which is intertwined with human culture and human nature, it is the most sordid, most misunderstood story. It is the most complex. It touches upon everything from art to culture to economics, politics. It's just amazing how much of this got wrapped up in the story of absinthe. And really, the twists and turns in the story of absinthe are all rooted in the dark side of human nature.
Yep. Humans are greedy, humans are selfish, and that's just how it is. And that's exactly why the crap synths, as I like to call them, out there, that's why they've profited for so long, is because they're playing up on that misconception and they're greedy.
Well, and to be fair, with a spirit like absinthe, it's very easy to deceive the public. First of all, it has a seductive story. And if someone doesn't know what something is, you can sell them anything. I mean, people that don't know the difference between absinthe and applesauce, who cares what you put in a bottle? How would they know? They have no point of reference. So this was unfortunately ripe for abuse.
Yep.
And it was abused. And I witnessed this happening, both here in the U.S. and across the Atlantic. And it was really a sorry state of affairs. And at first, I felt like I was swimming against a tidal wave of bad information. But being as tenacious as I am, and over time, and with the help of others who were part of the absinthe mafia, back in the days of internet forum, chat forums and things like that. I mean, eventually we got this turned around, and it really was a global effort that was born by people from all over the place, and it's just and it took years to do, but back around 2000, 2001, I realized that I had a lot of really good information as far as the nitty gritty about absinthe, the construction, everything about the botanicals, everything, the how and the why, and the scientific aspects, the distillation, and I realized that I had enough information to either write a really good book or just find a way to put the real thing back in a bottle.
And you ended up doing both.
Yes, but the second one first. So that was, and that was a challenge. And back in 2001, I started traveling around France with my American friend who lived in Paris at the time, Peter Schaff. And we were looking for some place that had distillation equipment from the 19th century that we might recognize as absinthe stills. So that was, it almost seems like in search of the proverbial hen's teeth. Quite an undertaking at the time, and I was spending a lot of time overseas. But eventually we got it all worked out. So fortunately, well, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, it was definitely helpful for the category. And where that's concerned, basically all I wanted to do was bring vintage absinthe back in its truest form and put it back in the market so people could experience it and understand it. So that was it's quite an arduous undertaking, but fortunately, in the end, after a lot of travel and a lot of time invested and a lot of money, eventually it all worked out.
And I'm really glad that they did, honestly. So, my next question is, what was your first experience with drinking pre-ban and vintage absinthe like?
Well, that was interesting because there was a shop in the French Quarter that I discovered way back, and it was called Lucid Antiques, and it specialized in French culinary antiques. And I was, when I happened across that shop and they had absinthe antiques, some, you know, absinthe glasses and spoons, and I bought them up. And it was a couple of years later when I got a call from them and telling me that, hey, I had this elderly woman from Chicago that had a bottle of old French liquor that she wanted to sell. And they called me and said, hey, you might want to get down here. This is something this is something you might be interested in.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, okay. So it was, it turned out to be an early bottling of Pernod Tarragona. And I think I paid a whopping $300 for it. So.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was full unopened. I said, yeah, I'll take that. and then I had a friend, a colleague, someone I worked with, who was like, who he told me, because wait a minute, I think I have a bottle of absinthe that was, it's a family heirloom. So we'll bring it. And he brought it, and it was an unopened bottle of Edward Pernod export strength, 72%. That was purchased by, if I remember correctly, it was his great grandfather in Cuba around 1900, which makes sense. And that was full and unopened.
Wow.
So, yeah, so for me, it was exciting because I was able to draw samples from these two bottles, which was my first real taste after reading about it for so long. It was my first real taste of what it was. So that was a pretty good little representation. And then, of course, when I started spending some time in Europe, started traveling to the outback of France and Switzerland, and meeting some other people, then I was able to get some other bottles. The European market, Edward Pernod, of course, Pernod Fils, multiple samples of that. Various brands, Auguste Junot, you know, top brands, some, you know, Absinthe Premier, some of the smaller brands as well. And we analyzed quite a few of them and tasted all of them. And then it's just like drinking wine. You know, when you have a bunch of red wines, they're all a little different, but they all invariably, you taste a dozen different red wines and you have a pretty good idea of what red wine tastes like.
Right.
Same thing. So once I was able to get into vintage absinthe and get a good cross section of brands and the opportunity to taste those, and it really helped my understanding of what's supposed to come out of the other end of the still.
Right. And
then at the time that I realized that recipes for distillation, you know, that's like generic cookbooks.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's a little bit of guidance in there. But there's a lot of twists and turns, and sometimes when you run across questions regarding the distillation of something, then you just have to put yourself in the mindset of someone who did this for a living in the 19th century. And then as for what they would have done when certain questions arise, the answers are pretty simple too. When you take the romance out of it and you get down to brass tacks and business, and you start to understand it. Right. Anyway, kind of hard to explain, but it's quite a bit of a learning curve for me.
I actually caught my first experience with drinking pre-ban absinthe on video, and it took every ounce of willpower to not cry, because I was just so thrilled to be tasting a piece of absinthe's history, and that I was one of the lucky few to do so.
It's a watershed moment, and an absinthe ages in the bottle, unlike a lot of spirits. So it's interesting to taste something that has 100 years of age on it, as opposed to, chartreuse. Chartreuse also ages in the bottle as well. Not quite to the extent that absinthe does, but it's pretty interesting to see the evolution of the flavor over 100 years. Of course, 100 years ago, people weren't drinking 100-year-olds absinthe generally. So
that would be a really weird situation if that actually did happen. Very rare, I would think.
Yeah. So quite a learning curve for me, but in the end, I was able to distill it down and understand that absinthe to distill absinthe, it takes labor, it takes energy, it takes money, it takes time. It's quite an art. And basically to cheapen it, especially back in those days, is to make it potentially dangerous. Same exact thing happened with gin in the 18th century. Same exact, and you had the gin craze. And is gin poisonous? No. But if it's not made properly, if it's adulterated, it sure can be. Same exact thing with absinthe. I mean, so when people try to romanticize it as something that people that were walking around the streets of Paris tripping on something like LSD, absolute rubbish.
Yep.
No, wrong.
Yeah, anyone who tries to insist to me that, yeah, for sure, absinthe was hallucinogenic back in the pre-ban era, and that's why it was banned. And I'm just like, so let me just take absinthe out of the equation and just swap in tequila so that you can understand exactly what happened here, so that you don't have this preconceived notion of tequila in your mind, or preconceived idea of absinthe in this case. Because, no one thinks twice about tequila. No one thinks twice nowadays about gin. No one thinks twice these days about, like, whiskey. But then suddenly, when absinthe is in the equation and in the narrative, they're just like, ooh, yeah, you just totally gonna trip balls on that. Shut up. Just every time I hear it, it's just like, okay, you're dumb. Shut up.
Well, it's a spirit that needs to be sold with a owner's manual. And,
oh my God, yes, it does.
and to be perfectly honest, one of the things that I was disappointed in finding out about absinthe early on is that it was an anise flavored spirit. And I had an absolute aversion to anything anise. Now, that has certainly since changed and evolved. I really like anise. Yeah, and that's another problem, because as North Americans, we just don't have the exposure to anise that Europeans and people from Mediterranean countries do. And even Asians, we're underexposed to it. We haven't processed it yet. So our perception of anise has not matured. So that took a little bit of while. That took a while for me to adapt to that.
Yeah, my husband, Mr. Sweet Tooth, in the next room, he hates anise. Can't stand anything that reminds him even vaguely of black licorice, and that even includes anything flavored with green anise. But he can tolerate most absinthe with sugar. But, that's one of the reasons why most of the time he won't enjoy a glass with me, and that makes me sad. But every now and then, he will try it or, like, have a glass with me just to make me happy.
Well, green anise, which is the traditional anise used in absinthe, has a different flavor than star anise.
Yes.
Almost everything that you taste that's made with anise today, everything from sambuca to candies, that's all oil of Chinese star anise, which is inexpensive.
Very.
And that was not used back in the day. In fact, that was believed to be potentially poisonous if distilled. Wasn't used. And it tastes different. I can tell them apart right away. Mm-hmm. And when people, talk about star anise, I'm like, well, that's fine, but that's not vintage absinthe. So it's a different flavor. And then once you become accustomed to these things, you can tell them apart.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I do have a hard time trying to convince people that absinthe is different because they hear, "Oh, it tastes like black licorice. I should not like go anywhere near that." And I'm just
Right.
like, "No, green anise is different. You might want to give it a try." Even people I know who absolutely hate black licorice will try absinthe and then love it.
It's a different flavor, and
Much different.
especially when there's no, when there's no sugar involved, it's a very different impression. It's a different flavor altogether. Um, and there are some absinthes out there that are made with oil of star anise and sugar and dye, and they shall remain nameless. Shall remain nameless, but that's not what absinthe was.
No, definitely not.
That's modern. That's just being cheap and modern, and anyway, it's under my skin.
I agree. And there's actually an analogy that I like using whenever I do come across an absinthe that has star anise in it. I kind of like to think of it as the frog's breath of the absinthe world. So that scene in The Night Before Christmas when Sally is like poisoning the doctor's soup with deadly nightshade and she covers it up with frog's breath. That's how I think of star anise in an absinthe recipe. It's just like, okay, when you're putting star anise in there, what exactly are you trying to cover up here? Are you trying to cover up improper distillation? What's going on?
Well, oil of star anise is cheap and has a different flavor. I'm not saying it's a bad flavor. It's a different flavor, and it's a flavor that I more associate with candy, with confections, with cheap sweets, than something that I take seriously like absinthe. It's just apple. It's not the same thing. I mean, it's and that's why star anise is not something that I really find when it comes to absinthe. It's out of place. It's unappealing to me. And the French back in the day, when they suspected star anise was always suspect of. The theory was that when it was distilled, it yields methanol, which of course is poisonous. That's not true. But there was some legitimate concern back in the day because Chinese star anise, which is something that is non-toxic to humans, was oftentimes adulterated. Well, I'll say oftentimes. It was at least occasionally adulterated with Japanese star anise, which is a different species of plant, which looks virtually identical. It takes a very experienced eye to tell them apart, but it is poisonous.
Crazy.
Shikimic acid and anisatin, and it is something that is poisonous. And poisonings of adulterated star anise go right up. I think the most recent, like 1950s, 1960s. So it's a very real thing. And I think that the profiteers back in the day that were making cheap versions of absinthe probably did get some. When you research the likely adulterants of absinthe, especially the ones that were reported to be used, as well as possible adulteration of star anise, when you research the symptoms of what these adulterants caused, they mysteriously look a bit like what people refer to as absinthism, which miraculously seem to affect mostly persons of lower socioeconomic status. The French were very brand conscious when buying absinthe back in the day. Those who could afford to be were. And you ever notice how absinthism, it seemed to affect mostly people in France, didn't really have no one who in North America suffered from absinthism. I don't really find any reports of that.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It could be because the cheap products weren't exported. They didn't get to these shores. When you stand back and you wipe away the romanticism and the things you want to believe, and then you look and you see how the pieces of the puzzle actually fit, then suddenly the picture becomes crystal clear. It really does. And why did things get so clouded? Well, once again, politics. Yep, that's it. All about people. It's politics and economics and greed, absolutely. Opportunism. It's absinthe touches on all these aspects of human nature and human history and cultural evolution and all the ills of the 19th century. Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story. And people are like, well, when you discover, the truths about it, does that diminish your interest? So, no, not at all.
Definitely not.
No, I think a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle looks better when the pieces are put together in a way that it fits and you can see the image for what it is.
Especially when it's a really pretty picture that you enjoy.
Yeah, it is a nice picture. And of course, back in the day when no one had to worry about a DUI and there was no social media. If you wanted to be social, you actually had to go and meet other humans, which was, pretty much every day at happy hour. I mean, absinthe was definitely a lubricant of choice. Quite a lot of pop and seductively pleasant flavor that washed away all the tobacco and coffee of the day. Yeah, it's good stuff. People enjoyed it, and it was quite fashionable.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really made me fall in love with it was its association with artists and musicians, especially with being an artist and a musician myself. I was definitely attracted to it even after I found out, oh, it's not hallucinogenic, but even still, I just found the whole thing just fascinating. And one of my favorite things to do is to study my sheet music while I am partaking of a glass of absinthe. It feels like I'm really opening myself up more to the piece that I'm learning. But that's just me. That's purely anecdotal, but that's just my experience with it.
Yeah, I like the way it perfumes a room.
Me too.
And when it was, when people mused about how the aroma of cafes at 5 p.m. would morph into this unmistakable aroma of absinthe wafting through the air, that was, it's really cool. I like that. That's a nice thought. It's interesting back in the day that I find that as a native New Orleanian, it was always a question of when did absinthe make its way to the New World? I mean, like really make its way to the New World. And my friend Ray Bordelon, who is he is a relentless researcher of New Orleans history. We find it first appearing in the importers' catalogs of goods from Europe. I think the earliest one we found was 1839, which is even early by French standards. Yeah, I mean it's so it's really interesting how early on it appears, and it's interesting how it evolved on a parallel course in this country, how it came to be something associated with as a key ingredient, a secret sauce in fancy cocktails, which became all the fashion and all the rage in Anglo-American culture by the turn of the century. So really interesting to see how that evolves and how empty absinthe bottles turn up in like turn of the century privies that, glass collectors dig up. Nothing like going out to the outhouse in the middle of a cold night and having a couple of hits of absinthe. But no, it's funny how bottles of absinthe seem to turn up in strange places. Even out and elsewhere in Louisiana, there was an old Cajun cottage style house where there was like a case of empty absinthe bottles up in the attic, which were undoubtedly being saved to be repurposed for some other use. But it's quite interesting because the old glass seals, it's unmistakable what they were.
Yeah. And I mean, it even ended up somewhere in Mexico because within the last couple of years, I did find out that my great-grandfather, who was from Mexico, was an absinthe drinker. And during one of his visits to come to the U.S. to visit my grandma, he brought absinthe with him and all the equipment and let my very old, family friend Carmen have some because he knew that she would really like it because she's really big into anise flavors. So it's amazing the influence that absinthe has had throughout the centuries, really.
Well, the top French and Swiss absinthes were articles of export. They made it around the world. It's really interesting because in I'm trying to think of which absinthe museum it was. It might have been the one in Cuvée, Switzerland. There's a letter from the U.S. consulate to Edward Pernod, telling him in French. It's really quite interesting. He said, if you export any more absinthe to the United States, we're going to have to give you your own embassy. So it's really quite interesting. Yeah, I mean, when you look in the old importer stock list, you can see what brands are being sold, and which, like I said, were exported worldwide. Anywhere that like French goods were liked and appreciated, which is pretty much anywhere, any port city, especially that had a little bit of global culture. Yeah, I mean, it was there. It was on every good bar in the United States by 1900. So, I mean, across the country, even in Yakima, Washington, which you might know where it is. I mean,
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Even in these old logging towns, it appears, and you can find these anecdotes about it in newspapers. So it was everywhere. And it's really quite interesting. I mean, when it was banned in 1912, and then of course we had this wonderful experiment called Prohibition that was very successful, wasn't it? 13 years of that, and then when that was repealed, there was still a whole range of cocktails. I referenced the 1930, Harry Craddock's The Savoy Cocktail Book, an American dealing with prohibition by going and bartending in London. Many, many cocktails in it called for absinthe. But when prohibition was repealed, you had nothing that tasted like absinthe. So, there were a lot of nails in the coffin of absinthe along the way. And it's a shame because it was during that time that the myths really got blown way out of proportion.
Absolutely.
And we had to deal with the fallout here in the turn of the 21st century. So
still, which is kind of embarrassing.
Still, yeah, I think I even got a notification today about some crappy article somewhere that talked about, Wormwood, Thujon, this whole thing. It's like, God, come on, people. Get out of the 1990s. We're past that.
Yeah, come on, dude. For real. Like, grow up. That actually brings me to one of the questions that I had in here. What is the misconception about absinthe that you find the most irritating?
The most irritating is if someone suggests to me that absinthe today is somehow not real. And if I ask them, oh, okay, well, why do you say it's not real? Oh, well, it doesn't have the wormwood in it. Wow. Okay. Well, first of all, wormwood is a dirty term. Wormwood doesn't mean anything. It's like saying wormwood is like saying fish. It doesn't tell you what type of fish. They're not all created equal. Okay. And there's one grand absinthe, Artemisia absinthium, that creates absinthe. And if we don't put it in absinthe, well, I can't imagine why in France, near the distillery, we put so much time and effort into growing our own. I mean, are we doing this because we think it looks pretty when it's black? So, when someone says something like that, I just say, hey, well, I'll tell you what, since you're obviously well-schooled in absinthe, the next time you're in France, right, to buy some real absinthe, right, why don't you stop by the distillery and I'll let you haul some 100-pound sacks of Artemisia absinthium. And you can tell me if you think that's real.
I love it. I love it.
I don't fault them. They're only repeating what sounds good to them, or, the simplest thing that seems to make the most sense, but it's completely wrong, obviously.
Obviously.
No, and on
Ugh.
that, no, we cultivate historically was grown in the fields of eastern France and western Switzerland that serviced the absinthe industry in the 19th century. And we don't go through that trouble and that hassle on an annual basis because we think it's pretty. We use it. Comes in handy for distilling absinthe.
Oh yeah, who would have thunk? I know for me, like the most irritating misconception that I've heard, and you can probably refute this with any kind of research that you've done over the many years that you've been studying absinthe, but recently I've been getting a lot of comments on my TikTok account, on my absinthe TikToks, which I spend a lot of time on, making sure they're thoroughly researched and making sure the shot looks right and looking all pretty and everything. And these idiots will come in and say, oh, well, can you like splash some laudanum in there and it'll make you trip balls? And I'm just like, just because you saw it in From Hell doesn't mean it was a thing.
No, it was not a thing. And and really laudanum, which is some pretty foul tasting stuff.
Ew.
Which you wouldn't have here in the United States anyway.
Nope.
No, not unless we go back in time, really. But you wouldn't ruin a glass of absinthe for that.
Absolutely not. I have a feeling that it would just be absolutely disgusting. But yeah, just because you saw Johnny Depp do it in a movie one time doesn't mean it was an actual thing.
Right. Let's put some laudanum in it and light, sugar cube on fire and all this, right? Because it looks cool.
Ugh. And, that's kind of the thing with the 19th century. A lot of things in the 19th century were done for the sake of practicality, not necessarily for the sake of looking cool like they are now. It's, even with, like, clothing and everything, that's just how it was.
Well, the 19th century was a very different situation. You could buy laudanum. You could buy over-the-counter preparations made from cocaine. I mean, that wasn't a problem. That was no big deal. That had never been made illegal. But there was all this talk of banning absinthe. How absurd was that? And that's why you see so the artists and the poets, who are, drinking absinthe was just basically, flipping the middle finger to authority. It's like it was so stupid, so ridiculous, so absurd that, we're going to drink loads of it. And what are you going to do? And basically that's what happened. Back in those days, the laudanum, that wasn't society's problem. No, it was absinthe. Oh, the shock and the horror.
Oh no, not absinthe. Oh no.
Right, don't drink absinthe. Have some Mariani wine instead, which was Bordeaux wine infused with coca leaves. Yeah, let's have some of that instead.
Oh yeah, let's ban absinthe, but vermouth is totally fine. Go ahead and have all the martinis you want, but no absinthe.
The funny thing is, if you want to pick on absinthe, you pick on the one ingredient that you find in absinthe, not much of anything else. But let's not talk about, the fact that, Italians will tell you that any traditional Italian vermouth contains some amount of Artemisia absinthium in it, as does chartreuse. It's there. Ask me how I know. Look, there is nothing particularly magical about it aside that it lends a certain flavor. That's all. And it was deemed a medicinal plant, and it was distilled because it's got a very strong bitter flavor that distillation tends to soften rather efficiently.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Wasn't there for hallucinations.
But of course, people will insist that back in the pre-ban era, absinthe was made for the intent of being hallucinogenic. But obviously, you and I know that's not true.
Yeah, I seem to recall sending you a bit of a account in the New England Journal of Medicine of someone who drank some wormwood in an attempt to trip balls, right? I don't know how many days did that person spend in ICU with kidney failure and everything else. Let me ask you this. Do you think they hallucinated while they were having massive convulsions, epileptic seizures? Would this person ever repeat the experience No.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I mean, it's like I always say, you can go to a herb shop and there's all sorts of things in there that you can abuse and you can hurt yourself with. And if you really want to make yourself a candidate for natural selection, you might guess there's all sorts of ways to hurt yourself with this stuff. But I mean, use responsibly. It's a different picture. And basically, another thing, I made my own absinthe with this stuff, yeah, right. And the funny thing is that if you actually analyze absinthe that's sold in most herb shops, it really there's not much in it. There's not much there. It is, however, really bitter. But as far as the singular compound that people falsely assume to be hallucinogenic and all that, it's not even there. Ask me how I. Ask me how.
Yeah, brilliant, like
Right. Oh
forensic
yeah.
chemist and distiller over here. He doesn't know anything. No, he's just lying to you guys and trying to like make you high.
So when someone says, "Oh, I made my own stuff and it made me trip," oh wow, okay,
I
yeah.
actually had an ex-girlfriend that claimed that. She was like, "Oh yeah, I drank a whole bottle of Lucid once and I totally tripped balls." And I'm just like,
Well, if you can put down a whole bottle of Lucid, you're one hell of a sponge because that's quite a lot of that's quite a kick. That's a feat. So I don't
yeah.
no
Yeah,
no
needless to say, I definitely gave her a very intense side eye.
definitely worthy of it. Definitely worthy.
So,
You have some
my next question.
questions?
Yeah, I actually do have another one of my questions that I came up with here. So, when I initially started doing my absinthe reviews back in 2016, I got yelled at by a lot of absinthe snobs telling me not to use sugar at all or ever, not even in my reviews. And then later on, when I started doing my reviews without sugar, I got a whole bunch of people screaming at me, telling me that sugar was an important part of the absinthe preparation ritual. And then, like I said, my husband over here, Mr. Sweet Tooth, cannot drink most absinthe unless it has sugar added to it. So,
Mhm.
admittedly, every now and then I will enjoy absinthe like recreationally with sugar added to it. So, my question is, and mind you, the reason why I started doing my reviews without sugar was because I wanted to assess the natural sweetness that was present in the absinthe I was drinking. And it's really hard to do that when you have sugar added to it. So, what is your opinion on sugar and absinthe?
Well, look, we can't knock people. First of all, the French, in particular, and generally speaking, people in the 19th century had more of a sweet tooth than we do. There's nothing wrong with taking it with sugar. Okay, I think it was Paul Verlaine who was like sitting on a train, departing a station in Paris, and yelling out the window of the train as the train left to the other people on the platform. He said something to the effect of, "I take it with sugar." Of course, he was just that kind of, and they knew what he was talking about. So there's nothing wrong with taking absinthe with sugar. Nothing wrong at all. It's just that, but if you're there for a tasting, if you want to taste the spirit, then that's not the way you would taste it. In the same way that being a distiller, if I want to taste someone's tequila, for example, I don't want to taste the reposado. Definitely don't want to taste the añejo. I want to taste the plata. I want to taste it, how it comes out of that still. That's what I want to, I mean, I'd like to taste it still strength. That's how I evaluate something as a distiller. Then again, distilling absinthe, I have to taste absinthe all day long. You get kind of used to it. But tasting it, without sugar is the way that I evaluate it. Now, for enjoyment, that's a whole different ballgame. I don't care what you can do whatever you want to it. Just don't light it on fire.
I was literally just about to say.
Don't go there. We're not talking about that. That's an abomination. I mean, if you walked into a bar and you asked for a glass of Macallan 18 Scotch, but you'd like it lit on fire, they would politely ask you to leave, I hope. Same thing with absinthe. There's no place for that. It's not Cafe Brûlot. There's no lighting anything on fire.
No.
But any way you want to take it, whatever, that is absolutely your prerogative. And if you want to take it with sugar, be my guest. A lot of people did, or can't say they were all wrong. It's the way they liked it. And, you know, then again, you know, us, the purists will say, if it's a good absinthe, I mean, you really don't need sugar. But it's personal. If you like things kind of on the sweet side, why not? If it's a good absinthe and you like things kind of sweet, it only gets better with sugar. There's no right or wrong in it. Can't fault you. Can't be too much of a snob. Just as I can't blame someone who wants to drink cask strength whiskey for putting a big ice cube in it. I get it. I understand it. No right or wrong there. It's all personal preference. Drink it the way you enjoy it.
I'm really, really happy to hear that because, boy, I've gotten so many messages over the years saying, no, you should never drink absinthe with sugar. And it's just like, okay, shut up.
No, don't evaluate it with sugar. You want to drink it with sugar, fine. But if you're going to taste them, if you're going to evaluate them, no.
And that's the exact reason why I do all my reviews without sugar from now on. Like,
absolutely.
I think I stopped using sugar in 2019 when I did my review of La Clandestine. And ever since then, I got so used to the flavor profile of absinthe without sugar that I was able to do my reviews without sugar from that point on. And I think that just made me a better absinthe reviewer in the long run.
Yeah, sugar's a masking agent. It's a mitigating agent. If there are flaws present, it can cover them.
Absolutely.
But if you're evaluating something, no, you want to taste your flaws.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's hard to tell how naturally sweet an absinthe is if there's sugar covering it up.
Right.
Okay, so one of my last questions that I would like to ask before we move on to the fan submitted questions is what would you like to see for the world of absinthe in the future?
Well, what I would like to see is, you know, absinthe got a big boost from the Renaissance in classic cocktail culture. So that was great. And it was timed. The timing was serendipitous. It was great because basically the re-emergence of quality absinthe in the market, of proper absinthe, coincided with the global phenomenon that has been the classic cocktail renaissance. And those two go hand in hand. Because really, there are certain classic cocktails, if you want to make them, you better have a quality absinthe in the bar. And there's nothing that really annoys me when I go to a really good bar and they have one absinthe on the bar and it's a bottle of something that clearly contains sugar and dye. That's bad. So basically for me, what I want to see is the continued proliferation of quality products and enough consumer education so they can distinguish the quality products from the ones that contain shortcuts or are just phony altogether. That's my wish.
Yeah, I mean,
who wants to go buy a bottle of Bordeaux red wine and read on the label that it's got red food coloring in it?
No one.
Would you still spend $50 or more for it?
No.
I wouldn't. So why would you do that with absinthe? Makes no sense. Anyway.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, it makes me equally as sad. Like, I actually had a friend go to one of the bars in the Yakima area, actually, and they ordered a Corpse Survivor #2, and it was made with the Empress Gin, but unfortunately they got all their proportions incorrect, and I'm pretty sure they didn't use real absinthe. I'm pretty sure they used just Absinthe, and that just broke my heart.
Yeah, I mean, if you're making a product that contains sugar and dye, well, first of all, I mean, you can always add sugar. You can't take it away. Mm-mm. If you're going to put that in a cocktail, that's not good. Cocktails that call for absinthe never contain sugar. Never contain sugar. And not only that, but the thing is the color it's like I tell people, the color of absinthe is something that originally I'm fairly certain was incidental. The coloring is botanicals that add flavor. It's just that they add the color as well. And it's and with that color comes certain flavors, and you don't get those flavors from fakery. They're not there if you're using green dye. It's really stupid. Just as the color of red wine comes from the must of grapes, comes from grape skins. You know, you can't fake that by adding red food coloring. It doesn't work.
Nope.
So, you know, it's always been about education. Always with absinthe. The success of absinthe is strongly dependent upon education and good information.
And that's what I try really hard to do on my channel, because there are decades worth of misinformation floating around out there. People implying that you're going to trip balls if you do this and do that, and you have to set it on fire. And I'm just here to tell people, no, that's not right.
Yeah, it's just, you know, I remember being in Amsterdam a few years ago on a layover and stopped in the spirit shop, and yeah, I saw some bottle of fake synth with a label on it that said something to the effect of, you know, warning may cause hallucinations. I mean, it's like, you know, this is absolutely worthless. And the thing is that you get some person that doesn't know any better, and you know, you got a bottle of 70% alcohol, and they take a shot of something, and they're waiting for the hallucinations, which don't come. So what do?
Take another one.
Another and another and another, and then you have some sort of, you know, that's not what absinthe is. No. That's not what absinthe is, and those products aren't absinthe. Fake synth. Yeah,
definitely not. So let's move on to the fan submitted questions. I have quite a few, and
good. Hit me with them. Can't wait.
Okay. So my friend Alessandra said that she wants to know how your native of New Orleans inspired you to create Jade Nouvelle Orleans.
Well, that's pretty interesting. Jade Nouvelle Orleans was the very first Jade that I released back in January of 2004.
Oh, wow.
And that was Jade Nouvelle Orleans until Terminus Oxygenee came along. That was the most, Nouvelle Orleans was the most expensive, most expensive to produce. It's complicated. It's tricky. I tell people I'll never completely master it. It was a very steep learning curve, going from a 1 liter scientific apparatus to 1,100 liter 19th century absinthe alembic stills. Yeah, it took me a while to get that worked out. But Jade Nouvelle Orleans, of course, an homage to my hometown, which was the epicenter of absinthe in North America prior to the ban. Jade Absinthe Nouvelle Orleans is, if I were a distiller in the 19th century, knowing what I know about vintage absinthe, it's what I would have distilled, because the core of it is vintage absinthe, but the finishing touches are a bit avant-garde, and it's what I would have done to distinguish myself in the among the top absinthe producers in the 19th century, had I been there at the time, which fortunately I'm not. So yeah, that's what it is, and it's a bit complicated, and it has a certain ensemble of alpine flowers that are very difficult to balance. But it gives it a flavor that's just uniquely Nouvelle Orleans, and it's just that touch of spice.
Yeah, I definitely, and you said, of course, I was spot on when I did my review of it. Like coriander and cloves in there, but I love that you didn't go overboard with the cloves.
Oh, because, actually, are there cloves in there?
Well, you said I did say that in my review, and you said I was spot on. So.
Oh, I think maybe I was thinking of something else. You know, many years ago. By the way, thank you for the question, Alessandra. Much appreciated. Many years ago, Dr. Justin Sledge, who you have met.
Yes.
He and I threw a big absinthe party in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. And it's the only Blanche that I ever. Well, I created Blanchette for the Combier Distillery in France, which was a product they distilled many years ago. But I did have a Absinthe Blanche that was a little bit different. Did I ever send you a sample of that? No, I don't think I did. Did I?
No.
Well, no one's had any in many, many years. I haven't distilled it in many, many years, but it's kind of interesting. So I don't know. Maybe, maybe I thought you were talking about something else. I can't remember. My memory's
That's
very
okay.
loose. Yeah, my memory's quite loose by this point. Now,
Nice pun there.
people have tried to guess for since I released it what's in Nouvelle Orleans. No one's gotten it right, and that's okay. I've heard all sorts of. I love hearing the theories. They're quite some of them quite bizarre, but it shall forever remain a secret.
Of course. I'm not going to tell a magician or an alchemist over here how he makes his magic over here. So
It's uniquely me, and the thing is, and it sells quite well in New Orleans, and it's kind of nice to go to the Sazerac bar in the Roosevelt Hotel and have a Nouvelle Orleans Sazerac.
I can imagine. Ugh, that must be so good in a Sazerac. Well, I've had it in a Sazerac, but not for a while. So maybe later on this evening.
Yeah, good choice.
She also asked another question. She wants to know what you think about the absinthe establishments in New Orleans that bastardize absinthe by insisting on serving it with the Bohemian method. Now, I actually had a friend go to New Orleans recently, friend of my husband's and mine. He's a very talented photographer. And he went to the old absinthe house and ordered a glass of butterfly. And before he could ask them not to set it on fire, they set it on fire. I know. I can just imagine like how heartbroken you would be if he did that to one of the Jades. But anyway, so then when pressed, he did press the bartender and said, "Hey, how come you don't prepare this the proper French ritual like you're supposed to?" And the bartender just said, "Oh, it takes too long. It takes up too much space." So, what do you think about your native of New Orleans bastardizing absinthe like this?
Well, first of all, let's be realistic. If you're going to go down Bourbon Street, you're on Bourbon Street.
If
You are, Bourbon Street is, the home of, a lot of. Uh, it's messy. It's messy.
Yeah,
And,
I've
and,
been
and,
there.
and over the years, I'm not sure. Over the years, we've had some good trainings at Old Absinthe House, but there's a bit of turnover, and then management changes, from time to time, and then sometimes you get what tourists want, kind of thing, and they want theatrics, or they do this to make it theatrical or try to make it exciting because that's once again you're on Bourbon Street, and depending upon where you go, you may have a different experience, and it's uh it's not like Bourbon Street aspires to be culturally historical or anything like that. It's pretty much a mess. So it's going to be hit and miss. Unfortunately, it's the way it is,
That
and
sucks.
I just can't. I can't be there to be the absent police, unfortunately. And it's just and there was a very nice, very historically accurate cocktail bar. I say was. It's still there in the back of the old Absinthe House, and it's called Belle Epoque. But they've had some issues with the building, and they've not reopened since the COVID shutdown.
Hmm.
But you can go there when it reopens, and you can have absinthe. You can have it prepared using the actual old green and white marble absinthe fountains that are in the bar, which were, I believe, repurposed water fountains from the old French opera house when it was renovated in the late 19th century. And that's where those marble fountains are mid 19th century, and they have been restored to functional use, and you can have an absinthe poured from loosh from one of those fountains.
That sounds incredible.
Yeah, it is. It is. So it's a bit of a different experience than going into the regular old Absinthe house, which is on Bourbon Street side, and having a drink in a plastic cup. So you can go to, it's not open as of the time that we are shooting this video, but hopefully sometime here in the near future it will reopen. I hope so, because because there was a total dichotomy there, and Belle Epoque did it right. Until then, you can go to places like the Sazerac Bar, Jewel of the South, Pirates Alley Cafe, Bourbonneau, and those sorts of places right there in the French Quarter. And yeah, you can.
Thank you so much for those recommendations. That's actually super helpful.
Yeah. If you just hunt around a little bit, you can do that. Even GW Finn's, which is a great seafood restaurant, you can have a decent absinthe there. So.
Ooh, good. Okay, I will keep that in mind. So, Sinister Hand asks, in your opinion, what is it about absinthe that inspires such passion within its drinkers? And also, what motivated you to help with lifting the ban in the U.S.?
Well, Sinister Hand, good question. I find that people that, one thing that's cool about absinthe is that not everyone knows about it. The people that know about absinthe are the people that actually turn over a few stones in life and look for what's not apparent on the surface. So that in itself, people that tend to be a little bit more knowledgeable in matters of art and history and culture are the people that know something about absinthe to begin with. It's still a niche spirit. It's not a mainstream product. So because of that, those that know something, those that are inspired by absinthe, those that are intrigued by absinthe, they're always people that tend to be a little more interested and a little more interesting. So it's always been a little bit of a subculture club, the people that were interested in absinthe, and like I said, back in the earlier days of the web, we were the absinthe mafia, so to speak. All the people that somehow in different places became interested in absinthe and all ended up, people from around the world, but we all ended up in this one place to meet and talk about it, which was kind of nice back then. As far as what it inspired me to deal with the, at the time, the 95-year-old ban on absinthe in the United States. Well, first of all, I had been distilling absinthe in France since January of 2004. And the biggest problem I had was, of course, I couldn't sell my products in my own country, which was ridiculous. And this was not a one-person effort. To get that ban lifted took a bit of it took the right people getting together. I created the Lucid brand for that effort to get the ban in the U.S. lifted. And that was an undertaking, because even though it was no longer a matter of law that absinthe was banned specifically, it was, in the U.S., when you want to sell any spirit in the U.S. market, you're guilty until proven innocent, basically. Yep. And there's just no way that they would permit anything like absinthe. And, on one hand, it seems ridiculous. And on the other hand, I could understand it a bit, because they were aware of the debacle that was happening in Europe with all this fake synth and, alluding to drugs and all this. And they didn't want that here, which I couldn't blame. And a little factoid that a lot of people don't know, when we got the ban lifted, which happened with the approval of Lucid on March 5th, 2007, they told us, they said, for a period of a year, we're going to put this on probationary basis. If there is even one lawsuit, that we're going to squash this whole thing again. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. So basically for that first year, we had our heads in the guillotine, so to speak.
No way.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Yeah. So that was, they were really, really cautious, perhaps overly so. But, we had to convince them that, look, we're not about putting a bunch of fake blue-green stuff, flavored vodka with green dye and sugar on the market and trying to, and try to imply that it's like drugs. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to bring back absinthe the way it was, and that is to fill a position of historical significance and respectability on every good bar that wants to produce classic cocktails. I mean, that's what we're here to revive. And by that point, I had been, I had done television work for like the History Channel and Discovery Channel, and so that helped to convince them that we were legit. And that's really what this ongoing debate was about. And I know they wanted to see us; they wanted us to just pack up and go away. But as I say, they underestimated how much one of my partners hated his real job. That was my esteemed colleague, Jared Gerfine, who, by the way, got his own Jeopardy question.
Oh.
So, yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, got to be proud of that. It doesn't happen every day. But yeah, so that was a tough effort. And the amount of money that was invested to make that happen was enough to buy a very comfortable house. Very.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's insane. That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. Welcome to bureaucracy.
Ugh. Yeah, my husband says that he's a good bureaucrat, but he hates it. Next question. Richard Furlong asks if the jades that are sold in the U.S. are the same as what is sold in Europe, or is it a slightly different recipe? He adds that the European version of Butterfly seems to have a richer flavor and more velvety mouthfeel than the version that is sold in the U.S., so that's why he asked.
Well, Richard, I'll let you in on a little secret. There is no difference in any jade that you buy anywhere in the world. They are exactly the same. Every jade absinthe is aged an average of about 3 years. And except for the Terminus Oxygenee, which is a little closer to 6. But for me to have to do that for 2 different versions would be ridiculous. And no, I don't do that. And I realize that someone else may understand that I know most of the absinthe distiller of good absinthes out there. I think that I don't want to answer for them, but I can tell you that there is only one jade, and it doesn't matter where you go in the world. If you have a jade 1901 in California, or if you have one at a bistro in Paris, they are exactly the same, bottled from the exact same aging tanks, and there's absolutely no difference. I hope that helps.
That definitely helps, and definitely quashes that myth, because I cannot tell you how many comments I get of people speculating that, and it just really, really annoys me.
Well, let me interject something there. I understand why people people say that. And because of regulations in the U.S. and such, we do have to kind of walk a bit of a line, which really doesn't change them. And it just makes our quality control more expensive and really annoying. But understand this, that back in 2007, right after, not that same year that we got absinthe re-legalized in the United States, got the ban lifted here, rather. I became we at the distillery, we were subjected to a raid by French customs. and most people don't know this. And I had thousands of liters of aging distillate that were seized.
Oh no.
And and locked under French customs seals, which I still have. And basically, what French customs told me is that there was a decree that had been passed by the French Ministry of Health back in 1988. And it was any absinthe-like spirit that contained enough fennel, hyssop, which is one of the traditional coloring plants, and grand absinthe would legally be declared a genuine absinthe and be subject to all the terms of the original ban from 1914.
Oh my God.
And I was the only producer in France to be found in violation. You can draw from that what you will.
Oh, that is insane. So,
I am the last producer in France to be charged and fined under the original absinthe ban of 1914 and all the draconian penalties that lie therein. I had to pay thousands of euros to stay out of jail for the heinous crime that I committed. And the Jade absinthes were the only ones found to be in violation.
Wow.
You draw from that what you like.
So, Richard, I hope that answers your question. So, Coaster Dude asks, how do we get the Jades in more stores in the U.S.? He said it would be really, really nice to waltz down to his local Total Wine and grab a Jade. He also said, we love you, Ted.
Well, Coaster Dude and a bunch of numbers, thank you for the kind words. Much appreciated. Yeah, here in the U.S., it's a little bit of an interesting situation because each state is like its own country. So once you get something imported to the U.S., you've got to get it distributed in different states. And basically, the distribution model. I don't want to bore you with all the details, but let's just say that prior to COVID, we were making some distribution changes in various states. Now, chances are, if you have a state where you've got Total Wine, which is a big retailer, which is based out of California, but they're in multiple states. That's probably more likely that before too long we'll get distribution in that state sorted or resorted in some cases. So we were starting to make some distribution changes, which were better for the brand prior to COVID. The whole COVID debacle upended a lot of this. So we are dealing with this bit of headache every day. So be patient is what I can tell you. Also, I think I may bring the smaller but popular in Europe 200 ml Jades bottlings into the U.S., which will help with distribution in some states. So that could be interesting. So stay tuned because we're taking a little hard look at that right now. That may happen real soon. So I didn't get the state where you were in, but it's okay because but if you've got Total Wine there, chances are something may happen soon. And I get these questions all the time, and I wish I could just hand carry the bottles over there. It's just unfortunate the way the U.S. system works. It's really annoying, but we're stepping.
So another one of my viewers, For Cold Floors, asks, how close do you think your absinthes are to absinthe from the past?
Well, I can tell you this. With respect to the absence of the past that I have recreated with what I feel to be very good accuracy, here's what I can tell you. Same plants, same herb bills. The plants come from the same regions and in some cases the same fields where they were cultivated to service the absinthe industry in the 19th century. I use the 19th century stills. I know what 19th century stills that each absinthe distiller that produced products I recreate. I know the equipment they had. I know the characteristics of that equipment. I know how it was heated. I know how it was cooled. I know if it had rectification present. And of course, I have the original products, the original absinthes themselves, which I have analyzed to a great extent and reverse engineered. The base spirit that they use, I have custom made for me to 19th century standards. Every aspect, there is no detail in this picture that has gone unnoticed. I have agonized every possible detail to make, and really the devil is in the details. You can get a core of basics, right? But it's the dozens of other variables that influence the outcome. I know how accurate there are. And in fact, there's one product in particular, one Jade product, that I actually found handwritten notes from the distillery, obviously not published, after I had released the product. And I was very pleased to find that my assessment was very accurate. So, which was encouraging. So I know that they're very good reproductions. And if you've tasted all the Jades, you have a very accurate concept of what vintage absinthe was in the 19th century, which is, of course, what I created Jade to do. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to produce an artisanal absinthe and to tailor it in different ways. For example, Lance Winters, who I'm acquainted with in San Francisco, and I know his product, St. George, and there are other absinthe distillers that have come along that have put out, very good products that each have their own sort of identity. But which is great for the category. But what I created with Jade was to be the most historically authentic in all these details that, like, I couldn't do if I distilled them in the United States. So that's the whole point of Jade. Jade is the cornerstone. Jade I created to be the cornerstone of the category, and let things expand in various directions from there as people see fit, without adulterating or cheapening the category, preferably. But that's what Jade. If you want to make a classic cocktail that called for absinthe and you're using Jade, you know that that's going to come out the way that it did when it was created. So,
lovely.
Thanks.
And then to wrap up the fan submitted questions, my friend Adam asks, clearly your efforts have made a change in American laws within the culture of absinthe. However, are you content with the changes that you've managed to make with your influence, or do you feel that there is still more work to be done?
There's still more work to be done, Adam. Unfortunately, getting the ban, the effective ban in the U.S. lifted was a huge milestone. Obviously, without that, we would still be embarrassingly sitting here in the dark. That was one big domino to fall. The next one was my implication with the authorities in France. That was the decree that threatened to put me behind bars for the heinous crime of creating absinthes that met their definition. Was instrumental in us putting together a legal effort to go to the Ministry of Health in France and challenge them to provide a scientific basis of why this decree should exist, and they couldn't. So they supported the lifting of it. So before that time, if you bought absinthe in Europe, in France, it couldn't say absinthe. It had to say boisson spiritueuse aux plants d'absinthe, an alcoholic spirit, alcoholic beverage containing absinthe plants. But since that whole kerfuffle went down, and we came out on top of that argument at great expense, I might ask. I never got my money back. That lifted the last vestiges of the old absinthe ban in France. So that was another big milestone. The next ones, and there are two. The work that needs to be done is to have a harmonized legal definition of absinthe passed in both the United States and Europe, and that's a that's been like herding cats. That's been a real problem. But the category needs it. And the other one would be for the FDA to relax its arbitrary position on Thujone, which really just makes our quality control stupidly tedious and expensive. You know, every time it makes importing absinthe into the United States, it's always our heads have always been in the guillotine, because one lab can say one thing, and if another lab it says something else, that can create a big problem. You know, so, and it's really it's an arbitrary figure that they use. It has no scientific basis. Europe was smart, and they relaxed it, which made a lot of sense and made our lives easier over there. But you know, it's just it's tough for us to walk a tightrope here. You know, I mean, if they were to like you know, create some issue, it could be really expensive and tragic for us. So in ways, it still feels like what we do is only quasi legal and in a gray area. You know, so drink up. Yep, is what it is.
So, one last question that I would like to ask
Okay.
is to everyone watching this video, what thing would you want them to take away from everything that we've said here? Or do you have anything special to say about absinthe?
Do I have anything special to say about absinthe other than the fact that it completely derailed my professional career, sent my life in this really off on this tangent out into deep space? No. The thing that I would really like people to take away is that you have to understand that absinthe back in the 19th century, to the people that enjoyed it, was a symbol. It was an icon of freedom. It was something that was just an indelible part of the vulgar French culture, as the Victorian English described it. It was just a part of the fabric of the cultural fabric of what was deemed the most cultural society on the planet back in the day. And it's something that, you know, appreciated for the, you know, and its most beautiful representations, or most, I should say, its truest, most faithful representations. It's a beautiful spirit. It definitely has a place in classic cocktail culture, which of course we now appreciate so much today. And it's something that, I mean, if everyone could see, you know, when people visit, when they happen to visit the distillery and I'm there and they see what's going on, and the whole process they find completely fascinating, which it really is. There's so many things that can go wrong, especially when you're dealing with 19th century equipment and there's no automation, and everything is done just completely based upon the senses and intuition and hallucination and whatever else. You know, it's just the art that goes into it, and it's a labor of love, and it's something that it's really all this work and sweat equity goes in, and it's just and what comes out on the other end of it's a beautiful thing. And you know, people ask me, you know, well, since you've reached the bottom of the rabbit hole, do you ever get bored? And it's like I tell them, I've never really reached the bottom. You know, I still learn things from it. And I just, you know, I want it to be appreciated in its just most historically authentic, culturally pure form. And like I say, let others do what they want from that point forward. But this is something that should not be lost in a cloud of misinformation and myth and rumors that sound cute but are really just lies. So, you know, for us, it's important because it's the appreciation of absinthe for what it truly is the only thing that really gives it lasting value.
Well, I definitely share in your sentiment about appreciating absinthe for what it is. Like, that is the whole goal of absinthe on my YouTube channel. So, with that being said, I want to give an enormous thanks to Ted for allowing me to interview him on my channel here so that you guys can get your questions about Absinthe answered by the man, the myth, and the legend himself.
And you never got to see this.
That's right. Yeah, I think I've still seen those on your website.
Yeah, I know. It's almost like they were, as if they were still available. Unfortunately, they aren't right now.
Aww.
Well, the guy
that my heart.
The glass blower that was doing this got, just got kind of famous there, and funny how that happens. Anyway, we're working on getting some more. Had a lot of inquiries, so I don't know. We'll see what we can do. It's like, why does everything I do and everything I want to do ends up being so hard? It shouldn't be that difficult.
Honestly, it's been like that for me too, especially with singing. Not so much with Absinthe, but with singing, yes.
Yeah, I think I
can sympathize.
I'll stick to the Absinthe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck with the singing. I'll stick to the Absinthe. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Ted, thank you so much. And thank you so much for stopping by. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for listening. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. So thank you all again for watching this interview. I know it was a little long, but in my opinion, if you're going to be sitting down and interviewing Ted Breaux, let's make it a long one. That's what she said. Just kidding. But that being said, he did have a lot of information to give, and I was really receptive to hearing anything that he had to say. And everything he had to say in our chat today was just fascinating, and I think anyone is going to find it fascinating. So thanks again for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more videos on Absinthe and Gothic literature and new goth music and other miscellaneous things that I love. And thank you so much to my patrons for your support every single month. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. I literally could not do this without you, and your support is also going toward my song that is going to be recorded in a couple months. So exciting. And to everyone, I love you, you're amazing, and thank you so much for submitting your questions, and I will see you guys later. Bye!